Hello, my friends. It is time for yet another tea and jam with me. I need to make a little dance or a theme song for this show. I've been thinking a lot about theme songs. I ran down the rabbit hole the other day because somebody had produced a YouTube video that was about all of the very special episodes of the sitcoms we used to watch. And I started thinking about like, what do we do, baby, without us? Anyway, today I'm so excited to have a conversation with one of my newest, but like really dearest friends, Reverend Andromeda Woodworth, who goes by Andi. I'm going to go ahead and just read her bio so that I can do this correctly. Originally from Atlanta proper, like Atlanta. I love that she wrote that right into her bio. She's a United Methodist pastor and is one of the founding pastors of Neighborhood Church in Candler Park, which is right around the corner from where I live. Andi was the first openly trans clergy person to give the daily devotion for the Georgia House of Representatives in 2024. I watched this when it streamed live and it was so kick-ass, y'all. Like she lovingly just handed it to them, y'all. She just kept them, held their feet to the fire. It was so beautiful. She loves all kinds of music and gardening, a savory scone, and helping people and communities grow through creativity, courage, and cooperating with God. So, Andi, are you there? Knock, knock, knock. Hello, Andi.
Here I am.
There you are. Welcome to Tea and Gym with me.
Thanks. It's so good to be here on this
Oh,
very special episode.
it is a very special episode, and it's a beautiful day in the
It
neighborhood.
is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And you might hear all kinds of things happening in the background because of where I am at the church. There's all kinds of stuff going
Yeah.
on these days, and there's like children on the playground shouting and stuff. So yeah, it's never a dull moment
And there's
around my
voting
world.
going on at the church. It's a precinct right now.
Yeah, early voting.
Yeah. How does
So
that feel to be a
it's
part?
good. I mean, it's one of the big ways that we like do hospitality and stuff, but it's I love that this one's a little different because early voting is like the whole county, so it could be really kind of anybody that comes through here, but I like election day proper because it's literally people that live just right here. So you just I like perch and just like talk to neighbors and stuff all day long. I'm aiming like this is one of my long-term goals is to just make election day a kind of party day. I think none of us should work and that we should just like hang out in the streets and it's a day to like talk to your neighbors and like I don't know grill things or something. So we try to do that a little bit at the church if we can.
Yeah. It's a fine line to walk, right? Because I remember, so I grew up in the Methodist church and my dad was a Methodist preacher. I think a lot of folks who know me know that. And I remember he always really felt strongly that he shouldn't be partisan or in any kind of way be known as like talking about politics. But at the same time, you do want to encourage people to be politically active, to be like a civically engaged human, right?
Yeah,
And I feel
yeah,
like
totally.
that's what you're doing by opening up the space in that way.
Yeah. And like knowing and hearing our neighbors, like we get to hear from them what excites them and infuriates them and all that kind of stuff. And that's just part of knowing our neighbors. And frankly, this neck of the woods, people are pretty politically engaged in different things. And so just that's just comes with the territory to a degree.
Yeah.
Um, I could go down a rabbit hole of how politically active people have been in the past, even though we kind of dance around that, you know.
Mhm.
I did so I like to do I'm a historian. I like history. I was a history minor in college. And I found out just doing a tour of the Georgia State Capitol that the road here that the church is on, McClendon Avenue, is named after a pretty prominent um, woman who was a suffragette human, and she was a Methodist and worked for voting rights for women in the very early 20th century, the 1900s. And she did that because she was so interested in, frankly, in prohibition. So she thought that she could get prohibition if she got women to vote. Um, which, anyways, just kind of, but all that came out of her her faith, but also we named the road after her, which is kind of cool. So,
That's fascinating. I've been reading this book called The Trouble with White Women, and it's a lot
mm,
about the early history of feminism and how a lot of those suffragettes were frankly racist.
oh,
Like
yes.
the
And just looking at her, this particular Miss
there was
McClendon,
so much.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
the sea they were all
we
swimming
could.
in,
I
most
think
of
we should
them.
love that one.
Correct.
Yes, yeah. So speaking of history, let's talk a little bit about your personal history and how you
Yeah.
got to here. So you mentioned that you grew up in Atlanta. What was
Yeah.
your early life like?
I grew up in Ormwood Park, which is just kind of across I-20 from where I am now. And my life was, I mean, I don't know if some people have the picture of their childhood being ideal, but mine felt pretty ideal, like lots of bike riding, lots of friends in the neighborhood, and just kind of going and hanging out with friends after school, and loved the little neighborhood elementary school I was a part of. And um, yeah, like my parents, my dad is a librarian, and my mom ended up working for the United Way. So they we're humans of both learning and service, if that makes sense. So they installed that in my siblings and I in different ways, which is still playing out, which is kind of cool. So I have two younger siblings, and one of them lives here in Atlanta, and one of them lives in Maine. Um, and the one in Maine, we call them the Woodworths of the North. But um, so my brother and his wife are both doctors, so they involved with healing work. Um, and my other sibling has been a librarian and some other things and very active in his community. So yeah, just um, grew up here in Atlanta and kind of really claim Atlanta as a place. You know what I mean? Some people are from outside of Atlanta proper, but I'm one of about three people that's still here that's from Atlanta, and we have meetings. Um,
Yes, and you wear unicorn horns.
totally, yeah,
So, my knowledge of ministers is they sometimes will talk about the call. Like at some point, I heard a call.
yeah.
So, did you know when you went to college that you were on the ministry track? What was that journey like for you?
It was a bit of a wrestle. I think that's a good way to think about faith, and it's certainly true for me. Like it's a wrestling situation, a push and a pull, and a holding on, and maybe letting go for a little bit. But yeah, in college there was a moment where like they were like, okay, all students in their second year will report to the cafeteria, which felt a little bit like high school. They're like, report to the dining hall, and you will fill out your paperwork to declare your major. And so it was like, oh crap, I should like do that. So I picked religion as a major because I had taken several religion classes and I really loved it. And that was sort of the beginning of my sophomore year. And then towards the end of that year, several things congealed that were like, you know what? I think I could draw on several threads of talents and gifts and experiences, and that this feels like a really solid way of being who I feel like I was made to be. Um, and some of that came out of summer camp experiences. Like I had worked at summer camps, yeah, opening the door on the summer camp
I
convo.
can't wait.
So um, I'd worked at summer camps, and really the thing that just I love summer camp. I love the way that it's just silly and fun and lots of things happening all the time. But I had a heart for the kids that were always sort of outside of a circle, like the kids that felt like they didn't fit in, that felt like they were odd or quirky or whatever. And my role was to just try to enfold those kids and love them and help them feel loved. Um, and that also was true for that particular camp that I worked at first had a this is a little bit wretched. I would not, if I was in charge, I would not do this this way. But it was they had a they called it inner city camp, and it was a day camp. Um, I think that one was a day camp. Yeah, for kids that came from like just the inner core of Atlanta, and they brought them out. Um, and uh, those kids I just fell in love with, right? That was like one of my favorite things. And so just being able to connect with kids and anyway, so all of that, like loving the folks that felt maybe hard to love. And then talking about the Bible and God and stuff. And then like doing music and drama and being creative. Like all those things like were why I left camp. And then I was like, wait, I could do this as a job, I guess. Um, and so I mean some of that is like I feel like God is in all of that, you know? I didn't have a moment where like I was walking down the road and being struck by a, beam of light. Um, but there's a kind of magnetism. I was drawn into that, and I feel like that is how God works, at least in my life, is this kind of drawing and nudging and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I feel like we should structure says say or go, right?
Oh, you cut out for like 10 seconds. So can you
Okay.
try again? Sorry.
I was no, you feel free to just hop in here, but I was trying to like say the way that the system works is that the every year the contract is up for review, right? So like and you may not have to move, but there's always the possibility every year that it's up if it's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
About whether or not you're going to go. So the way that means that the minister ends up moving every once in a while, like can be up to a year, less than a year. It can be, 4 to 6 years. So you've moved around some in
Yeah.
your, and you had a previous marriage and children. And so let's talk a little bit about what that part of Methodist ministering looks like.
Yeah. It's particularly early on, it felt like this deep underlying anxiety, like at any moment I'm going to get yanked or something. The more that I've done this, the longer that I'm in this, I think there's a little bit more comfort with it and a trust. I do have more of a trust, which maybe I mean, talk to me in like 3 months or something, and I'd be like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. I don't have any trust in this anymore or something. But right now, I feel like I trust the leaders that are involved with this in a way that I didn't in previous seasons, and that they don't want to break a thing that's working. And that's true anywhere, not just in my world, my life. Um, so that there is a little bit of a conversation, right? I think a long time ago, it used to be like, that preacher been there for 3 years, and that's probably the last year they need to be there just cause. And they would move people just cause, you know. And organizationally, the more I think about that, if a church is pretty stable, you could rotate leaders just to kind of give variety. But the way that that works is the church is just kind of like constant, you know, and you need a little spice from the pastor changing. Um, but now churches are just in chaos. And so I think there's some wisdom in keeping the pastor longer. Um, we done had us a divorce, like a Methodist divorce. And so like our church has been fine through all of that, but many churches, it was real gnarly for some years. And so I don't think anybody's looking to just move people around quite the way they used to. But every year, and I just did it for this year, there is like, it feels like middle school. Like you get those notes. There's like, do you like me? Check yes or no. And that's, I mean, it's literally like there's 4 boxes. Like, do you want to? No, get me out. I am actually going to quit. And like, no, just need to talk about it or whatever. I mean, I can't think of any other job that's like every year. It's like, do you want to quit? You know? Um, so hopefully I'll be back again. We'll see.
Right. So one of the things that's provided as a certain amount of stability is you have been at neighborhood church for 8 years or so, and that is because you helped to create this church. So
Yeah,
could you tell us a little bit about the founding of this church that you're at?
sure. Um, so uh neighborhood is formed out of the merger of two pre-existing churches that were long established churches that were sort of declining. A lot of churches that happens to. One church had about 40 people in worship. One church had about 25-ish. And they both had these big buildings and stuff, and it was hard. So they started talking, and in 2016, they completed a like formal merger process. And then that summer, I and my co-pastor, then co-pastor, she just left in this past summer to go serve another church. Um, but we were sent here to really kind of help them do this merging thing and then kind of pivot outward. So um, we decided to not have worship, to not have a church service every Sunday. Um, and we moved instead to a once a month rhythm. And instead of all the energy that it takes to like do a church service every week, we use that energy to get out and to meet people and to just meet with community leaders and have community functions where we're gonna have like parties out in public, you know. We'd show up at the playground or the park across the street with popsicles and just meet the people that were hanging out. And before the end of that first year, we discerned the name Neighborhood Church, which came from a new friend that we had met. And it was one of several strange names, but that one ended up being the favorite. And it does feel a little bit sometimes like we just named the church like the most plain kind of name, right? Like the Vanilla Church or whatever. But the more that we lean into it, and I talk about this in church sometimes, but neighborhood is the state of being a neighbor. And I think that, in the Bible, it says that the greatest commandment is like love God with everything that you've got, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And sometimes churches do some of that first stuff, which is good and important if that's your commitment. But also then like we don't do, like I'm not sure anybody does a lot of good work to like help people know and love their neighbors in a real way. And we take that as a spiritual practice and try to both practice it and encourage other people to do that wherever they are. So we've been doing that work since 2016, 2017, and it's been a wild ride. It is never boring, and I'm so thankful to be here. I'm not sure that I could serve a different church again. You know, I could. I mean, don't tell my boss that, but like, I will go where I'm sent and all that stuff. But this is a church that really is living the way I feel like churches ought to live.
Mm. It's interesting because you helped to give birth to this new thing
Yeah.
uh, with the big election year that happened previously.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the same year that I founded Story Muse. So I was in the middle of rebirthing my professional life that same year. And then in 2020, you also began the process of rebirthing yourself in a completely different way.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
Um, yeah, and it's interesting. I often tell this story as linked to the story of our church because in many ways it is like, um, so for a long time, but really starting in, I think, 2018, we uh, took on a habit in our worship service of welcoming folks into the worship moment by saying like all of who you are is welcome here. So I would stand up most Sundays and say all of who you are is welcome here. And after a while, I was realizing I realized some things about myself. Late in 2018, I went to a friend's lake house for a kind of personal retreat and watched a lot of YouTube because I was like, I got to work some stuff out. And what I sort of came to an awareness of is that I was trans. And part of what I was working out is some of the finer nuances of who I can understand myself to be. Like use the language if we're getting in community around being trans feminine non-binary because that's sort of where I see myself. And I didn't really quite know that I could be both of those things, if that makes sense. So I came back from that retreat and like started telling like my partner at the time and my kids and all that kind of stuff that I think that this is true of me, and so I need to figure this out. But my first thing was like, how am I going to keep my job if I transition? Like, how is this going to go? Um, but I was like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about that part yet. I'm going to just start a transition process and not really tell anybody. Um, and so I started hormone replacement therapy in January of 2020. And then in a way that is a strange gift, I was just in our house for months, right? Because of the pandemic, and was able to kind of live into a new sense of myself, just in our house, right? And also showing up on YouTube for online church services and all that kind of stuff. But um, I began to realize that when we said all of you are as welcome here, I could say that to myself, right? That I could show up and be myself. And if there was a church that was going to be just fine with me being who I really am, that it was this church. And so um, that was ended up being totally the case, which is pretty cool. I shared with our church leadership in 2021 that I was in the process of a transition, that I was trans. And they were like, yeah, okay, cool. How can we support you? And I told my bishop in January of 2022, so almost a year later. And uh, she was, I've learned that this is not a quotation. I'm supposed to say that, like, I am not quoting my bishop, because she got a little agitated one time when I summarized. But we had a long conversation, and the summary of that conversation is, she was like, there is nothing in the Methodist Book of Discipline, which is very important to Methodists. There's nothing in the Book of Discipline about being trans, one way or the other. So you have a ministry to do, go and do it. Um, and uh, as a side note, right, this was before our denomination has changed policies publicly around queer folks. Um, and so she was taking a risk, to affirm me, I guess, which I appreciate. And she was also right, because our denomination was locked in this, wrestling match, around, uh, technically around gay, lesbian, and not straight passing bi people, for decades, but we tend to just name that as like, we want to embrace and affirm queer people. But in all of that, there was no discussion about trans people because they wrote those rules in 1972. And trans people have always existed, but they weren't um, in the front and center place that sometimes we are now. So there were no rules, which is kind of cool. So I kind of snuck in with a loophole, being myself. And since then, the church has embraced me. I've been able to show up as myself and be embraced by all the layers of leadership of my church, and be out in the world in public. And actually, since then, the denomination as a whole has changed, and moved to a position that's technically a neutral position. They just don't have anything to say about queer people or doing same-gender marriages, those kinds of things. There's no prohibitions, so we can do as we see fit, which is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. It is unfortunately the thing that has caused the divorce that you were mentioning, though, because
Correct.
huge
Yeah.
swath of churches have chosen to move away because they couldn't grok with a denomination that just didn't have the prohibitions anymore.
Right.
And that's very
And
unfortunate.
in this neck of the woods, what was particularly hurtful for me is that some of the people driving that change, like the kind of rallying people to leave, are people that I worked with or were mentors in various things along the way. And they used um, the stories about me, because they knew me, um, to rally people to leave the denomination. But that does not, frankly, keep me awake at night, because that's the thing that they will have to be accountable for, to the universe. And I sleep great, being myself.
You really have to have a strong sense of who you are and your value in order to stand up to that though. I mean,
Yeah.
I admire you, and I know you never wanted to be anybody's poster child, and that um I just appreciate that you lead in the way that you do.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not looking to be a poster child, but I don't mind showing up and being me and you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about camp because that is one of the things I've been so excited to talk to you about. So this is a thing that we both share is the way that camp has continued to inform our professional lives, right?
Mm.
So I worked at a camp. I grew up going to camp. So as a Methodist preacher's kid, I was moving around all the time, but I went to the same camp all, every summer. And then I worked at the camp through college and even lived there for the first year after I graduated and went back there as my vacation from like after I'd moved away. Um, but this was also because I was secretly in love with my co-assistant director and waiting for that person to come around to the life plan that we were going to get married and like grow old together and sit on the rocking chairs and like watch the children play. So, um, tell me, how do you feel like camp informed who you were and continues to do so? Like, I want to just riff on camp for a while.
Yeah. So um I have a good friend who's like a storyteller. His name's Andy Irwin. And he yeah, if you know. But Andy said one time that if you were to just be like, quick, Andy, what's your job? He'd be like, I'm a camp counselor because it's just like his like there's an impression, like a deep sense of identity that was formed early. The way that baby chicks like impress on their mama or something. It was just like something happened when he was a camp counselor that was like, this has formed me. And I really much resonate with that. That if you were to ask me this, Andy, quick, what's your job? I'm like, well, I'm basically a camp counselor. So the I think that almost everything is solved by getting in a circle and like talking about it. And in fact, so I worked at several camps. One of the camps I worked at here in Georgia, I was in charge of I think they were middle schoolers. And it was one of these weeks where it was a little bit tumultuous for whatever reason. And I really loved my co-counselor. And so we were having fun, but I think some of the kids weren't. And at some point, I want to feel like it was like Tuesday or Wednesday, there was a little trio of kids that a trio of girls that had come, and they were all friends, and they'd come for years, and so they were those kids that roll in. They were like, "This is our camp, and you are permitted to be here, but we are the real people." And they said we need to discuss some things, and so they invited my co-counselor and I into a meeting, like just in the lodge or whatever of our cabins, and they're like, we need to discuss how this week is not meeting our expectations. And so we like wanted to honor that. And so we kind of changed some of our activities and like, but then they started calling that the issue circle. And so several times through the rest of the week, we were like, let's gather everyone and have the issue circle and we will talk out. And so like that became a kind of model for me and my co-counselor and that we would use in other times. And we ended up working there several years. And so we'd like, it's time for the issue circle. And you're just like, don't leave until the issue is resolved. And it's like kind of helpful, right? To be
Oh,
able to talk about that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff still like um, plays out for me. I think that you could kind of solve just about everything if you get in a circle, hold hands, and maybe sing a song. Um, you know?
I love it. Yes. I mean, I work with an organization where there are a lot of issues brought to bear around a circle. And sometimes I'm just like, I wish we could just talk about this like what in real time while it's happening rather than waiting for the circle. But
Yeah,
yes.
well, right. Um, But what's lovely is that one of these young ladies, she, grew up as people do sometimes. And so I ended up working at another camp outside of Washington, D.C., and I was the program director there, and then had some other roles later. But I needed an assistant director, and she had ended up in D.C. and had done some lobbying work or something, and then was going to law school that year in the fall and had a free summer. And we started talking, and she was like, yeah, like, um, I could be your assistant director for a summer. And I was like, yeah. So Katie became my assistant director for that summer. And then like a couple years later, I think, she got married and I did her wedding. So, um, which was really fun. So I just, the way that lives get woven together with camp is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the ways that I feel like I will always be a camp counselor is that uh, my car, Ruby Simone, I refer to affectionately as the camp counselor car. And it
Mm.
is chock full of equipment. Like I am constantly dreaming of what is the thing, like what is the moment when somebody's going to be like, oh, gee, and it's not even as mundane as a band-aid. It is like, what is the thing that someone's going to need that I will just magically be able to pull out of my car? Like the car version of the Mary Poppins bag.
Exactly.
Like I just really need to have the stuff. And it definitely started with watching the camp counselor dudes who had to have like all of the stuff, when we were be going down the river or rappelling or something. And it really became a competition of like having all the stuff. And now it's just transported to now, like I just need and my car is ridiculous. I sometimes have to clean it out and like pare it down and reorganize everything just because no one needs to have that many umbrellas or water bottles or
But what
blankets.
if you do? You
I
know?
know it's a kind of
Yeah. My so one of my best friends that we were like camp friends too, like we always went to camp together, um, has what he calls now the super happy fun bag. But at the time, our kind of gathering, hoarding, whatever you want to call that, was around items that would be needed for skits. And what if we were called on to do some kind of avant-garde dramatic presentation without any rehearsal? Like, what could we use from this prop bag, in essence? And there was all kind of stuff in the super happy fun bag, like rubber chickens and a zebra print shirt that we had, and some dresses and wigs. I mean, it was like, what do people say? There were no signs. Anyway, so uh, and then he became a teacher, and so the super happy fun bag like just went to his classroom, and so he still has that stuff and busts it out sometimes.
so fun. I think probably the summer I had the most fun was when I was assistant director and I got to run the schedule. And so I created theme weeks so that the skit night would then become like superhero week or, it like then it like really changed up and gave a zhuzh to the skit night,
Oh yeah.
and like, so I became Moo Moo Woman and, like all these different new characters I created.
We So I worked at a camp with one of my good friends from the camp days is Jason Waller, who now runs Waller's Coffee Shop in Atlanta, if anybody knows that.
Really? You
Oh
know
yeah,
that?
we did all, I mean, Jason and I have done crazy stuff in the woods, for sure. Um, and his brother, anyway, like I was in his wedding and his first wedding, I should say. Anyway, so one time we went to a thrift store because we decided that we needed formal attire for camp. And so there were certain days we would just look at each other and be like, suit day. And we would just like wear suits, and like full business attire at camp. You know, just kick it up.
And how did that go for like building a fire or, any other
Was
thing?
so hot because these were like polyester suits, from the thrift store. Um, and they're kind of like a one or two time use kind of thing. Because after a while they just smell weird and you can't do nothing about it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So what are other than sitting in a circle to work the ish out, which I think is a great lesson, and the just silliness, what do you feel like is a lesson you feel like you just will always be able to apply to work?
Mm. Um, like from the camp.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Yeah,
camping.
yeah, yeah.
Million.
Um, I mean, frankly, in my line of work, right, I feel like one of the things that is missing in church
Mhm.
is a sense of deep community, right? And somehow I learned from camp like people come to church and you can pop into church and you kind of sit in a chair or a pew or whatever, and you can do the thing, you listen to the sermon, sing a song, and go home. And you don't have to be known by anyone, really, right? In most churches. You can do that. And even if you get to know people, you can kind of know some names, what they do, maybe some things about them, but it can be really hard to have that go to a different level, like a different layer of who we are. And something about camp, at least in my experiences, is that there is a possibility in a short window of time, a week or less, that somehow you have like taken people out of a normal routine and just dissolved some of the inhibitions, and you have built trust, and you have created a space where it is okay to just be yourself. Um, and my experiences is that God is in those things, right? Like that God is in that kind of being yourself, forming community, and having adventures, frankly. And so, and I've talked about this with people that are actively in camping ministry now, that like I want church to have something of that. I don't know if we succeed all the time, but a space where you can be yourself, where trust is built with people, and that there's a way to live life like an adventure, right, with a group of people. Um, and that feels just like maybe the most fulfilling thing possible. I don't, does that make any sense? Um,
Yeah, I'm thinking about sort of yeah, I think the illusion of danger and through the adventure and the getting out of, your environment. But I think it's the temporality is a lot of what you're talking about versus we have the illusion of longevity in a church.
right.
So people put off, they delay the getting to know each other. Whereas if you're, only on a short timeline, it's like I only have this window to get to know a person.
I need to invest in this. Yeah.
Yep. But I mean, certainly you see there's still lone wolves who will like absolutely like never let their guards down in a
Yeah.
situation like that. Although there's still that opportunity through, this one thing that happens, it'll galvanize a group, and even like the most offended human will wind up bonding.
And like, how is it that you can practice a kind of facilitation of that, right? As a leader, is to kind of notice this, what is it called in experiential education? Like this is a learning opportunity. This is a teachable moment, those things where you just kind of step in and say, like, this is a moment where we can learn more from what's happening and fold people in. This is going to be a pivotal point, right? To just kind of be always attentive to that.
Yeah.
Um, this is a chance for trust to be built, right? And that trust is the currency that we're operating with. Um,
Yeah. I think I'm just thinking about one of the things that I struggled with at camp was that I told the same stories over and over again. I kind of stuck into this like very small canon of the silly camp stories.
yeah,
Became known as Cricket, the storyteller, and I just didn't have access to what would become, this wildly popular personal storytelling movement.
right.
And as I think about what I do now, I'm not even sure if there would have been an opportunity for that in the camp situation, but I do sometimes regret that it's taken me so long to
Mm,
get to what I do.
mm,
And I don't think there's a need to regret that. But when I think about camp, I see the seeds there. And I understand why camp has this like particular camp style story, you know, of like Herman the Salamander and those kinds of stories. And especially if it's a different population every single week, you can tell the same story over and over again, and it
exactly.
kills, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, and you're
But I think
refining.
about
Like I,
how
I remember doing
I
that
was
when I
during
was
that
running a
time. I was
camp.
stuck.
sorry.
Mhm.
When I was running a camp, I ended up doing worship, and um, that was sort of my role in the weekly thing was because I was the seminary trained person, and um, the staff by the end of the summer hated me because it was like I'm going to do the same worship service basically like every day, every week. They're like, oh, it's Thursday, and Andy's going to talk about Noah or whatever, and um, but it was a chance to see, oh, this moment I can make this more effective, or I can really connect with this thing, and um,
So here's that trade-off that, you were talking about how you can build a deep community with a group of people over a short period of time. But with the long relationship, then you got to get better. You got to find new material. You got to that's the trade-off right there.
and and we're all in the midst of our real lives, right? Like very rarely, I'm trying to think if I have any examples or exceptions to this. Um, Very rarely was there a moment where, for example, anyone like died at camp. Do you know what I mean? Like I think I remember a few times where people had to be like, well, my a parent or a grandparent usually, passed away, like a staff member, and they would need to go be a part of a service or something. But it felt like there was not a lot of chronic illness. There was, do you know what I mean? Like those kind of real things that happen to people.
So you're not caring for people at their most vulnerable. I mean, certainly group building is a vulnerable thing, but
Yeah.
the ways that you're building community around sort of our more tender parts is
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you know, one of the ways that we've come to be in relationship is that I'm creating this show. That's why I'm having these conversations with people. It's called I'm a Little Teapot, Existential Angst and the Search for Purpose at the Dawn of the Millennium. And we first met a little more than a year ago when I got stationed at your church for the Atlanta Fringe Festival.
Yeah.
And I was there all weekend long. And I didn't even know that the church was Methodist. It just kind of snuck up and surprised me in that way. And I just kept looking around. It was just like rainbows this and you are love that. And I was like, this place is as queer as the day is long. I love it. And then we ran into each other again at a show that I was hosting at Seven Stages. And we just sort of got into a conversation about this work that I've been doing. Um, and so the four tenets of the project are passion, purpose, possibility, and power, the four P's of the Teapot Project.
Right on.
I'm wondering, first of all, like, which of these resonates with you? Do you have reflections on these? Like, what's bubbling up for you when it comes to the Teapot Project?
Yeah. Um, Possibility and purpose both resonate with me, I think.
Mm.
Um, I I don't know. I exist in a world of ideas and ideation. That's often what I bring to a circle or to a project. And so possibilities are what I see, and what keep me awake at night, and going down roads of thinking, well, what happens if this happens, and what is this like? So, and frankly, as a trans person, the sense that um, the things that sometimes you feel are impossible are actually possible. Um, I will look at my girlfriend sometimes, and we'll just kind of look at each other, and we're like, we have been a part of magic. Like this, what we have done and who we are now. If you had asked either of us, 5 years ago or something, um, who we would be now and what we would be up to, it would have seemed impossible. But in fact, it was very possible, and here we are. Um, and that sort of ties me to purpose, right? Like I think there, I love being a pastor. It does, I think, echo a lot of my gifts, or call on my gifts. I have to use all of my capacities to do this well. But there was a season where I was like, well, I'm just gonna, be another pastor in the world, and that's fine. hopefully I'll be a good one. But I do have a sense now that I mean, there are very few trans ministers that are serving churches the way that I am, I think. I mean, there are more of us, and I want there to be more of us. Um, but being just a visible, openly trans person, and being connected to a religious space in a way that is hopefully positive, um, I do find a lot of purpose in that, that there's people out there that needs to know that they are loved and lovable, and that in fact the universe is on their side. What they're doing is a holy thing. They are being who they are meant to be. Like, you can tell I can get worked up about this, but I feel like I have a purpose, right? I have people that I need to go find and to be supportive of. Um, yeah.
Mm. So do you have any advice for me? I always ask people this at some point in the conversation, like as I go to build the show. I mean, we've submitted a couple of applications together to work with y'all in the First Existentialist congregation across Candler Park to,
Yeah.
you know, possibly, do the show at in the two places, and to build the relationship between the two congregations and deepen the work in the neighborhood. So, but I'm just curious, when you think about a show that's about the search for purpose and just creating a storytelling show in general, and as much as we've gotten to know each other over the last year, like what do you want to see out of a show like that? And what
Mm.
would your advice be?
Um, okay, so this I'm just shooting from the hip. I think that there is a lot of conversation, particularly in religious spaces, of a certain kind, usually very evangelical spaces, that's kind of like, you got to find your purpose. Like, what is it, The Purpose-Driven Life, or that book?
Or something?
Um, yeah. I don't really vibe with that crowd.
Okay.
Um, and some of why I don't vibe with them is the sense that either you have one purpose, or a sense that like uh, that it is a fixed target, that it's, I don't know what, that like if you worked harder, you would just know it. Do you know what I mean? That it works that way. And I don't think it works that way. I feel like purpose comes from practice, right? We're all working this out, and we're trying to find what our purpose is by trying on different hats and roles. And so that's where the story of it comes in, right? Like, you're you're telling the story of how you overcome, right? Like, you're telling the story of how you found your purpose by realizing what's not your purpose, and then you jump your tea everywhere. You you realize what your purpose is over time and through a process, right? And I want that to be told more, right? And I think that's sort of what I sense from you too, right? Is that you're in this process of telling the journey, right? That's why story is a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely, I think some of the best stories are about how we dropped it, messed it up, tripped over it, all of those, that part of the journey. I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out like what the ending is. Maybe that's part of the process. Um, and so I would love to hear a story from you about possibility or purpose. Like, you want to help us know that for you?
Mhm. Um, yeah, like, I mean, I'm happy to tell you the thing that sort of happened to me in the last year, and it was in a line in the bio, right? Going to go talk to the House of Representatives, was a really interesting moment of both possibility and purpose, right? For me at least. Hopefully it was for others. Um, but I was invited sort of at the last minute to come and speak. The way it works is that your representative is supposed to, I think they have a sense like, this week or this day, this representative is responsible for finding a person. And so my representative, Syra Draper, who was lovely, reached out and said, hey, like, And it was like a Thursday. And she's like, what are you doing Monday? You want to come talk to the House of Representatives? Because I had a cancellation. Like the person that was scheduled is ill. And so I just need to find somebody. And I was like, yeah, I would like to come do this. And actually, Angie and I, my co-pastor and I were like, maybe we could both come do it. We'll do like a tag team thing or something. And Syra floated that, and they were like, no, it has to be one person. So Angie kind of like conferred, and she's like, it should be you. And I was like, okay. So, but I was like, Syra, we know each other. Like, how's this going to go before a largely conservative crowd? And the Speaker of the House is certainly Republican and all that. So, um, and this is after some wretched legislation has been proposed, even in this session, right? Um, and has been in past years and all that. So I was like, well, I will put myself out there and they will figure it out. They have their own processes and maybe they'll Google me. Maybe they won't. Maybe they won't have time to. I don't know. But nobody said no. And so I went in there and did my thing. Um, and and frankly, I didn't know this till like the day before, but they were like, yeah, so the way this works is you will show up at this time and you will meet with your representative and the Speaker of the House for 15 minutes, and then you will go in and do the devotion thing. So me, my girlfriend, and my representative sat in the office of the House of the Speaker of the House and with one of his like staff members, and we just cut up like I told Baptist jokes. I just like did the kind of Georgia thing that I know how to do because I'm from Georgia. Um,
Code switch too.
yeah, exactly. And later on, my representative was like, "You speak like they do." I was like, "Girl, yes, I do." Um, so, um,
Also mentioned that your girlfriend is also trans.
yes, exactly. So here are these very tall girls that roll in here. And my representative is cis, but she's also pretty tall, frankly, and she wears heels and stuff. So like here's three tall girls rolling in here. And I don't know what the speaker thought. I really don't. But frankly, it doesn't matter what he thought. And we can I'm not saying that we're friends, but we did all the things that were respectable, and either he had no clue or he was very respectful, right? Like he didn't seem prickly at us being there. And we did the thing, and my purpose in that, right, was to try to help the representatives know that I see them as real people, as real humans, and that I want them to see me as a real human and the rest of us in Georgia as real humans, right? That we have complex lives with our own motivations and interests and pitfalls and all those things, and that they can be a part of the work of helping us all to thrive as humans if they choose, or they can play games. Um, and so I do think that there is possibility in government. I don't know. I know that it is deadlocked and all that stuff, but I feel like there is possibility. And I wanted to remind them of the possibility that they have in their power to work in a more inclusive way for more people as we really are, not as we kind of get imagined to be or demonized to be or whatever. And in doing that and showing up in public and just being myself, it did feel like I was doing the right thing for that moment, right? Finding some purpose in that. And what's interesting also is I go back there and went back during the session several times just for other things, and people know me. I mean, the Democrats will talk to me, but everybody sort of recognizes me, I think. Um, and so there is some other possibilities there too, of how we could just continue to work together. Um, and I show up, and like part of my purpose, and I might have mentioned this before, is I have somebody in each hand with me. Like I'm holding the hand of two folks. One is the older trans folks that feel like there is no possibility for them to transition and to be happy. And I know many people that have approached me shared who they are with me. Um, and they're like, I can never transition. So you are the one that will speak for us. And I'm like, oh, friends, this is such weight. But I hold them with me and I hold those kids, right? Like the trans kids that need a life of possibility and not a life of just harm. So when I'm showing up with my purpose, that's my purpose, right? Like those two friends in both hands. Um, yeah.
It was a really beautiful message that you brought, and such a clear manifestation of the notion that the personal is political at the same time. You know, I feel like you weren't necessarily conveying that from the words that you were speaking, but just symbolically, the opportunity to do that and the way that you showed up with such grace. And I do hope that it continues to have rippling effects of your presence and being there. And you know, I never um, take for granted the fact that we live in our state's capital, but because you know, I used to live 3 to 6 hours away from my state's capital, and so now just the fact that we can roll out of bed and be there in 10 minutes, I wish that more of us took advantage of that opportunity. So I thank you so much for the activism that you not only yourself do, but continue to you know, encourage people to do, especially in this last week before pretty big election we're about to have.
Yeah.
I'm holding a lot of anxiety about it, and I imagine that it's hard being a community leader, sitting with people and their anxieties. I'm
Particularly
gonna,
when I have them myself. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So some of that is how do we just sit together, right? And then go knock some doors or something. That's uh my girlfriend is like trying to do something every day,
Mhm.
um, as best as she can, and sometimes I can go with her, but and that's we've knocked a lot of doors, and it's not as scary as it seems at first, and um, yeah, it's actually kind of fun. So
Yeah.
we're doing what we can do.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today and for the just the beauty, the stories that you bring to my life, to the world, to this community, and I I don't know what else to say. I think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Oh, thanks. Right back at you. This is really fun. Thanks for letting me do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, if you're listening in, you can follow Andy on a number of platforms that I'll post, as well as the work that the folks at Neighborhood Church is doing. And hopefully I'll be able to do a performance there one day. We find some funding. And we'll be talking to you soon. Have a great day.
Excellent. Thanks, friends.
Please, do that.